Welcome back to the daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. We are in section 68 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Yesterday we learned about the laws of Tfilas HaDerech. There is a special prayer in the Siddur, a short prayer that is recited when one travels. And we discussed when exactly that prayer should be made. It's once you've gone outside of the city limits, once you're on your way, and then subsequently for every additional day that you are traveling, you will continue to make that bracha, that same prayer, you'll say it, but without Hashem's name. So practically it means that when you're going on a flight, then and the flight probably will go beyond the city limits. Even if you're going to Cape Town, I imagine the airplane still needs to get out there to come back. So you make this prayer as the plane is taking off. As it goes on its runway, it probably is already outside. And then you'd make the prayer, Tfilas HaDerech. If you're doing an overnight flight, we said you just say it once with a bracha, and the next morning you can say it with the other bracha. We said preferably you should stop the car to make the prayer, not just so that you could read it without getting yourself in danger, but also because it's better to make a bracha standing or at least in one place. And we said that it's preferable to say the prayer after making another bracha. That way, when you start Baruch Atah Hashem on the other bracha, it will cover for this prayer as well. Okay. Then additionally, we said, before going on a journey, it's a good idea to give tzedakah. And when escorting somebody on a journey, when somebody is leaving on a journey, you should escort him. Escort him out on his way. And when you could go no further, wait at that spot until he's out of sight. This is a big component to hospitality, not just hosting people in your house, but seeing them off, not just because you want them to go, God forbid, but because that shows that you actually want to spend time with them beyond the time that you've actually been able to be together in the home. You're actually seeing them off, not just sending them away.
Is that a minimum of 4 amos?
Pardon?
Is that a minimum of 4 amos?
Did we say so? Maybe. It sounds like you know. Sounds good.
I heard it from a second-hand source.
Pardon?
I heard it from someone.
Okay. 4 hours is about 4 steps. Go on the journey, start the journey together, and then see them off. You could stand and wait as they pull out with their car or whatever it is to make sure that they are looked after. Maybe in South Africa there's an added dimension because a point of vulnerability is sometimes between home and departure of vehicles. So you want to be sure that they're all okay. And when you're traveling, you also say some tehillim with concentration and humility. Make sure to take an extra tzitzit strings if you're worried yours will become torn, or I mentioned the example of an extra yarmulke. Make sure that you're well supplied so that you will be able to travel as a Jew. Finally, he mentions that you should leave only once it gets light, and you should arrive before nightfall. And we discussed how the reason for that is because traveling at night is dangerous. You may fall in a hole, and also there are these negative energies if you're alone at night. He said nowadays the authorities have said that with good lighting, familiarity of the roads, if you're not by yourself, then that would be less problematic to travel at night. Okay, now we move on to a new discussion, and that is what about eating on the roads? If you're staying by somebody's house, are you able to eat there? So here we go. When eating at an inn, you should carefully take note whether the owner and his household are righteous and trustworthy. Meaning whether you could be sure that what you're eating is kosher. If you contemplate eating meat at an unfamiliar place, you should investigate thoroughly as to who is the sheichet, who actually shechted the animal, who slaughtered the animal, and who is the rabbi that supervised it. But due to our many sins, violations are common. So before the kashrus agencies, the whole kosher industry came into existence, people often ask, what do we need all of these kosher symbols and stamps, and it comes with fees and costs and cost of kosher food. Back in the shtetl, they didn't have all of that. Quite right, they didn't. But what that meant was that back in the shtetl, a guy before he started eating would want to know, okay, so you got this cow from your farm. Who did you get to shecht it for you? Because if a sheichet doesn't shecht it right, nobody will ever know. For example, one of the things that a sheichet is not allowed to do is he's not allowed to apply force to the knife. He can't push down on the knife. He needs to just make sure the knife is sharp without any nicks and move across. If he pushes hard, you'll never be able to know, but that would make the animal simply not kosher. So it's a cow, and it had a sheichet, and it looks like it was shechted, but it wasn't. So therefore, you want to be sure that the sheichet that shechted it is somebody that you trust, somebody that's super God-fearing, somebody who is working so much on his connection with Hashem that he would never allow he would say right away if it wasn't kosher, even if it meant that the farmer is going to be unhappy, because if he's paying him per hour and he says the animal's not kosher, then the farmer's just lost money on his hour. And then there's that pressure. Till today, there's often that balance where the farmers are complaining that the sheikhtim are not making enough animals kosher. They say the sheikhtim are not good enough, and the sheikhtim are saying that it's not us, it's something else. So there is this possible tension, and depending on the degree of the sheichet's level of God-fearingness, that will determine how sure you could be that he would tell you if the animal wasn't kosher. And he won't fool himself into saying it's kosher if it's not. So before the kashrus agencies existed, you would actually want to know who the sheichet was, and then you would also want to know who the rabbi was that supervised it. But back then, before the everything became commercialized, if you had some tomato sauce, then you know that the tomatoes came from the garden or from the market, and that the tomatoes were cooked, and that was tomato sauce. Nowadays, you buy a bottle of tomato sauce, there are dozens of ingredients from all over the globe. So nowadays, there's really no way to know if it's kosher unless you have kashrus agencies that are sending reps to each of these locations, India and all over the world, to spot check on the factories and ensure that the factory owners aren't mixing in any ingredients that are not kosher. That was just a little bit of a sidetrack, but this is particularly relevant when traveling, because when traveling, you might be unfamiliar and you would need to ensure that what you're eating is kosher. Under modern terms, this means that you need to familiarize yourself with kashrus agencies. Unfortunately, today, there are many kosher certifications which are actually, I don't know how to term it, but they say the food is kosher when it's not. Because really, what's for a kosher agency to exist, it just means that some guy needs to call himself a rabbi and say that I certify that this is kosher by my standards. But if the person himself has no standards, then it means nothing that he's certified that it's kosher. So today when traveling, one needs to inquire what are reliable kosher certifications and what are unreliable kosher certifications. And also, there's a difference sometimes amongst reliable kosher certifications. Some certifications hold a higher standard than others, meaning that they will have certain principles in place, which will be more costly, perhaps, to ensure that there's no mixing up of non-kosher. While the others also have, it's kind of like hygiene. You have you have in different supermarkets for Woolworths, right? Woolworths doesn't actually make their own sauces. They don't have any factory. A factory of sauces goes to Woolworths and they ask Woolworths, can we supply you with this sauce? And Woolworths checks out the factory, and if they like it, then Woolworths says, sure, we'll give you our packaging, we'll give you our branding. So Woolworths itself doesn't have any factories. It's just a company that chooses from factories which items to stock. And then you have Checkers, Pick and Pay. I don't want to be political over here, but between Checkers, Pick and Pay, and Woolworths, some of the stores hold a higher hygienic standard than others. I can tell you from bigger factories, some factories, the level of cleanliness is much higher than others. So yes, in order to be able to legally trade, you'll have to meet a minimal standard, and then chances are your food is clean. But some people are pedantic about wanting to be extra sure that their food is absolutely spotless. And the same thing goes for spiritual cleanliness, spiritual hygiene, and that's why you have different levels amongst kosher agencies. Okay. Now, talking about davening on the way. So when davening on a journey, you should take care to wrap yourself in a talis gadol, just as you do when praying in the synagogue. Meaning, if you want to travel light and you don't want to schlep your whole talis with you, you might say, I'm wearing my regular tzitzis, which are much smaller, and maybe that will do the job for davening, because when you say Shema, you want to be wearing your talis, and you want to be wearing tefillin. So maybe I'll suffice with my talis katan, my tzitzis, and that will suffice. So I don't need to take my large talis with me, or maybe somebody has some kind of smaller mini talis that they want to use for traveling. He says, no, that doesn't suffice, because according to some opinions, a talis needs to be something big enough for you to wrap yourself in it. And if you're not doing that, then when you say the Shema and you mention the tzitzis, and you accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven, you are missing out on the energy of the talis. If you are traveling by foot, then when reciting the verses Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem, you should stand still. So it's not just foot, in the car as well. If for whatever reason you are davening while driving, then you should stop, say the Shema and Baruch Shem. But if you're flying on an airplane, I wouldn't suggest turning off the engine for you to say Shema, because that might not have a happy ending. And if you are riding an animal or sitting in a wagon, you are permitted to recite the Shema in that position while reciting. Okay. But while reciting Shemona Esrei, you should stand. If you same would go for a car. If you're pressed to be on your way, and if you can stand for at least the first 3 brachos of the Amidah of the Shemona Esrei and the last 3 brachos, you should do so. If not, if you cannot stand, then you may pray while sitting in the wagon or carriage, or in short, the car, and perform the required bendings in a sitting position. So if you are traveling on an airplane, for example, and it comes time for Shemona Esrei, so if you can stand, then you should do that. But if you can't, then you can either stand at least for the first and last 3 blessings, or you could sit. You could say Shemona Esrei and you would bow in the regular places or from a sitting position. Now, we've been speaking about davening while you're traveling, but that's if for whatever reason you didn't daven beforehand. However, it's preferable to pray immediately at dawn. So usually we say that you shouldn't do the Amidah until sunrise. Dawn can be an hour or 2 before sunrise. You can look at the times for today. So rather daven before sunrise to be able to daven like a bench. Even though you're davening before the preferable time, at least when you're still at home, you'll be able to concentrate properly. Then wait till the ideal time for davening, where you actually won't be able to daven properly. Looking over here, we have this morning sunrise was at 5:10, and dawn was at 3:50 in the morning. So if you had an early morning flight to Cape Town this morning, and the flight was, or if you're on a journey, then certainly if you're leaving, you're driving to Bloemfontein, and you have an 8 o'clock appointment, and so you want to leave at 5 in the morning, and that means that it's before sunrise. You're not supposed to daven Amidah before sunrise. So what should you do? He says the first thing you want to do is daven. So rather daven earlier. If you need to leave at 5 a.m., then rather daven earlier, rather daven at 4:30, so that you can daven like a bench while you're still at home, then have to daven while you're on the plane, or while you're in the car, while you're traveling. Okay, back to the text. Mincha even immediately after a half hour past the day, in order to pray while standing and to pray properly. So again, daven mincha at your first opportunity. You could daven mincha nowadays as early as 12:28. Okay, so if you've got a flight out and your flight is at 2 in the afternoon, you don't want to miss mincha. So then daven before you fly. You could nowadays, this time of year, you could daven at 12:30 in the afternoon, and that way your mincha, again, you'll be able to daven like a bench. Okay. Now, there's another halacha, which is that you're not allowed to daven until you wash your hands. He said that we spoke about previously already. We said that it's a matter of walking in front of you, you should walk up to, I think we said 4 mil, which is about 4 kilometers. We said nowadays some say it's not actually the distance, but because it's by car, rather the time it would take to walk that. So you would walk up to 72 minutes in order to have water to daven in front of you, or up to about 18 minutes behind you. Okay, please God, to be continued tomorrow. More about traveling.